Hi everyone. So we're going to continue with our principles of design. So the next one is the rhythm and movement, or rhythm or movement. And this is usually created with patterns, so it actually links quite nicely with that. So rhythm and movement talks about the movement of our eye through a picture. So if we look, it is like the banisters that swirl up and around to bring our eye to the focal point, which would be that hole at the top. So it's not necessarily that the picture moves like an optical illusion. It could also be that our eye is being led to a certain point. Emphasis, which is talking about our focal points. In this picture, we can see it's been created through line. So the lines of this tunnel that is all pointing towards our person at the end there. It's also created through light. So this halo that basically surrounds the person is much lighter than anywhere else in the picture. So using line, using light, color to create the emphasis. So using those elements to create our focal points. Unity and harmony talks about the wholeness of a picture, so balance or being successful. If you've got a picture of a funeral and everybody's in black, everybody is super sad and super depressed, but in between all of these depressed and crying people, there's a little girl who's sitting there happy with balloons, smiling, laughing. It creates discord and it creates things that are ununified. So creating an image that is not unified can also be like your aim and your purpose. So it doesn't need to be perfect, it doesn't need to be unified and pretty. Next one is contrast. So contrast talks about the differences. Okay, it's not necessarily dark and light. It can be like our zebra here, which has very dark black stripes and very light white stripes. It can also be contrasted with size, for example, something very small being placed next to something very big. So creating that contrast in the image. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be massively contrasted. Okay, the next thing is proportion. So proportion talks about the sizing, but it also talks about the sizing in relation to other things. So if I showed you a picture of this dog without a background, without the cat in front of it, without the gate, you would think straight away that this picture would be in proportion because you wouldn't have anything to compare it to. But because we've got the house and the gate and the little kitten, suddenly things are out of proportion. So it is not just the size, it is the size in relation to something else. So the dog in relation to the gate, the dog in relation to the cat is massive and out of proportion. Pattern would be repetition. So some artists use repetition, and sometimes it doesn't have to be a pattern. For example, Salvador Dali's ants. In a lot of his pictures, he repeats that motif, that picture of ants, and that's one of his signatures. So that pattern of the ants makes us identify that work with him. So it can be a pattern as you see on the screen, or it can be something that is repeated in that artist's work. Okay, the next thing that we are going to start looking at is media and techniques, so different ways of doing things. If we look at these pictures on the screen, they are all pictures of deer, but you can see that each picture is done in a completely different way and in a different medium. We've got pencil, we've got watercolors, we've got oil paints, and we've got a sculpture as well. So same image basically, but done in such different ways. Okay, so the first thing is our two-dimensional media. So two-dimensional, remember, is flat, not 3D. You cannot look at the back of it. It is basically one-sided. It is the direct and most basic. So the materials I'm going to look at with you are charcoal, pencil, pen, brush, ink, crayons, chalk pastels, which need to be sprayed with fixatives like charcoals. Okay, so you can always go and do some experimentation with these medias. There are tons and tons of videos on YouTube about, for example, charcoal tutorials. If you're really interested in learning that, then you can always look up different techniques. I'll also link in a tutorial of each kind of medium so that you can actually try it if you want to. Okay, so Degas is an artist that we're going to study in grade 11, and you can see in this artwork he has used chalk pastels. So this is the kind of style that you will get out of using chalk pastels, and chalk pastels are one of those mediums that have to be sprayed with a fixative. If you don't have a fixative, you can also use an aerosol airspray. Okay, so not the liquid hairspray, it's going to make your work look all stained. But you can use the cheap aerosol hairsprays to actually spray your work so that it doesn't smudge. Drawing can be made with anything that makes it mark on anything that can be marked on. So you can literally draw on a dress or um, a t-shirt or anything like that. Okay, then we go into painting. All painting consists of three things: a pigment, a vehicle, and a support. So the pigment is the color. Okay, so it's actually most of the time it's powders that can be mixed into liquids to create that color. So acrylic paints are water based and they are mixed, the powder would be mixed with a water base. Oils, the powder would be mixed with an oil base. And these things then get placed on what we call a support. So the support would be your canvas or your paper that you are actually working on. So pigment, powders get mixed into a vehicle or a medium, and then they get placed onto a support. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video after this activity. You're going to do activity 1.1 on page 30. Each one of these images, there are 5 of them, A, B, C, D, and E. You are going to try and label them. What do you call each of these objects?